Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by Little Shop of Horrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. All right, today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Justin Smith. He's you can find many of his podcasts and his clothing brand, but I think we'll get to that as the conversation goes. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. It's finally not freezing outside, and I think we're finally done with the cold. I hope.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, it's I'm good.
Time to get back out in the field and go herping.
Dude, I was gonna go this weekend, but my buddy Justin Olson, we were planning to go hit up one of the newer WMAs, but unfortunately he's got a family emergency, and he's not gonna be able to go. So I might just go flip some tin at my parents' place or something.
Yeah,
make it less of a trip. But I'm itching.
Yes.
I'm itching bad.
We had a very weird winter down here in Texas this year, where it was just not cold, and then ridiculously cold for like a week, and we just had our first 99-degree day a couple days ago.
Oh man,
and
wasted no time.
It's been in the high 80s ever since, but you see people posting snakes up, going, "Hey, they're out."
Yeah.
So time to get out there and start herping here soon.
We've been in the in like the mid to upper 70s. I think we're supposed to be closer to like lower 80s by the weekend, and like I'm itching to get back out and find some diamondbacks and stuff. So after last year when we found our first one, that's like what I'm gunning for now every year is just diamondbacks. Like everything else is cool too, but I gotta see some adamantius.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's just, everybody's different in what their focuses are, but I can definitely relate with being solely focused on one species, and, the other stuff is cool to see and it's part of the adventure, but I'm looking for one thing in particular for sure. Well, excellent.
We're for tortoises too, because, those burrows are used by so much stuff, but you get to go out there and see those guys kind of hanging out and basking. And we found a couple hatchlings the last couple times we've gone out, sort of just wandering around some of the fields. And it's really cool to see those. I've developed such a big appreciation and love for gophers, ecologically, and just the fact that they're cool as hell. Like we get a tortoise that's in our own backyard, that we can call our own kind of thing, So
yeah, it's super cool. And definitely it's, I don't think people realize you see people down here, the Texas tortoises we have, they look like a young sulcata. And so often people go, "I found a sulcata in my backyard." And, no, that's not that. Actually, I saw my first Texas tortoise last year, and it was crossing some railroad tracks on the way back from my shop to my house. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, sulcata? No, a Texas tortoise. Holy shit. Look at that. Super cool. Well, excellent. Where'd you grow up at?
I tell people kind of a little bit everywhere. I was a Navy kid, so moved around every 2 to 4 years. So did some time in Virginia twice, Connecticut, Hawaii, here in South Carolina, and I think my dad was stationed somewhere in Florida when I was a baby, but that was before I could recall any of that. So kind of all over the place.
Gotcha.
South Carolina's home and always will be, and I'm a very proud South Carolinian.
All right. Well, where did your interest in reptiles start? When did that first kind of?
Very young. I was probably 6 or 7. I was born in 1990, so I'm 35 now. I don't know exactly where it sort of like I can't remember a single point where it sort of began, but I was very interested in dinosaurs and stuff. I do, one of my like earliest memories, and I have a picture of it somewhere. There was like a 4-H meeting or something, because I think my older sister was doing 4-H at the time, and there was a guy there with a berm. And I just remember seeing that thing and thinking that was like the coolest. I couldn't tell you exactly like what it was about it, but I was just absolutely fascinated with it. And the guy let me take a picture with him with that berm. Um, and it was kind of like the stereotypical snake dude that comes to your school. Like he looks like he just hopped out of his, 82 Ford with a pack of Marlboro Reds in his pocket, and just like asking the kids if they want to come check out this Cobra. But it was cool. That's so as far back as I can remember. That's I think one of the main. If I had to put my finger on a single like moment that sort of set things off, I feel like that was one of them. And then I found I don't know how I ended up with a little Steraria, little red-bellied snake. That I also somehow had like some sort of critter keeper type deal. I don't know where that came from, but I kept it in this thing for a couple days and like unfortunately left it on my little desk. I had a bunk bed at the time or something. There was a little desk under it, and that desk got afternoon sun, and I left it right there on the desk in front of that sun. So I came home one day from school or something, and that thing was just absolutely fried. So that was another early memory, but then it was some rough green snakes and some corn snakes that my dad would find because he would hunt semi regularly, and so he'd see some stuff while he was out there, and sometimes he brought it home, sometimes he didn't. And ever since then, minus really 1 year in particular that I could think of, like I've had herps of some form or fashion or another. Even when we were in Hawaii, we had some Jackson's chameleons, found some blind snakes, and yeah, there's always been something like in the house, whether it was snakes, lizards. Had some hissing roaches as a kid for some reason, just a couple of them. I don't know. Again, don't know how I ended up with them, but I had them and enjoyed them. There's always been something around. So.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting too, when you think about the stereotypical guy with a big berm and that kind of, I'm sure it wasn't potentially the most educational experience out of it, but it started that passion that you had, and that kind of echoing effect of does that guy even think about that nowadays? But
Right.
what that
I'd
went on to
be
create in you.
so curious as to where he's at now.
Yeah.
He's very reminiscent of like Joe Dirt when he was working at the carnival kind of thing. Like that's looking back on it now, it's like it's sort of like the heyday of cops. And so when you saw like some of the people on cops in the South, I'm like, that's 100% this dude. He just had a berm. He was just the guy with the berm. Like
Yeah. Just
someone
some
said, "Hey,
teaching
that
you.
guy, Billy's got a snake. Tell him to bring it to the 4-H meeting." And you're like, "All right, pay me in Coors Light banquets, and we're good to go."
Yeah.
You know?
But I mean, the outcome of it was, it
Right?
lit that spark and created someone like you, and you think about the education that you guys are providing and what you're doing. But we will get to that as we go on here. Well, very
Yeah.
cool, very cool. And so a lot of the animals you were keeping were just native animals that you were finding around your backyard or that your father was finding.
Yeah.
What were your, I mean, obviously it sounds like your parents were obviously okay with it. What were their takes on it, and any memories stand out for you in that?
Man, I was and still am so incredibly lucky to have parents that never at any point like stifled the interest. Um, it was native stuff when I was little, and then circa like 2004 when we were living in Virginia Beach at the time, my dad wanted to start breeding corn snakes, and so he and I, like as sort of a father son just thing to do, started breeding corns, and that morphed into some king snakes, and um, I got my first like year of mastics and some more chameleons, a veiled or two. I'm not going to say more as if I pursued those on any serious level. I actually had terrible experiences with chameleons. But like I had parents that were never like scared of what was going on, of the things I was having. And my dad, I think, had a similar upbringing too. I mean, he and his uh, brother, they were keeping like some rattlesnakes and stuff in aquariums. That was like the 60s and 70s. So they were like, it was again, wild, wild west. Like they could do pretty much whatever they wanted and no one questioned it. So they were always keeping stuff like that. And I think at one point they had like a caiman of some sort. So it's something I think my dad was kind of used to, and he kind of missed maybe from his childhood to a degree. So um, he was into corn snakes. He's big into Alterna. He's kept Alterna off and on over the years. And like as the older I've gotten, the more I've realized like how cool and lucky it is that I have a parent that's also into it. Maybe not to the same degree or level that I am, but will go to a show with me and be like, "Did you see X, Y, and Z on that table over there? Like, you know, we should go check that out." Like, and sometimes he just gets a wild hair and he's like, "I want Alterna again." He'll buy an Alterna, and then after a year or so, he'll be like, we're retired now. I want to go travel more. So here's the stuff I've amassed.
I mean, that's cool for you.
Yeah, but it's man, I'm so lucky because I hear so many people that had parents that were just like wouldn't let them get something until they were, 13 or whatever, and I never had that problem.
Yep.
It was very lucky.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a common thread. I feel like you get kind of both people, where you get the people that their parents were not supportive, and so that motivated them to do it. And then you get the people that their parents were supportive, and they were able to grow off that, and that's so cool. And so you were talking about you and your dad getting into breeding snakes and doing that. What was kind of the time frame that you guys were doing that, and was the propagation of reptiles something that you were interested in before, or was that something that you and your father both found interest in kind of together and were doing together? If that makes sense.
So that was the corn, like the having a decent sized corn collection and like breeding corns year to year was early 2000s. Like I said, 2000, 2004. My dad retired in 2004, and so then we moved back home, which is here in Beaufort, South Carolina, and I've been here ever since. But even after moving back down here, which we brought all the corns and stuff with us not long after coming back, he retired and the first time, and then he was kind of like, I don't want to, I don't want this to consume all my free time because he's retired now. He wants to go do whatever he wants to do. So ended up, selling off most of the collection as far as corns and stuff go. I kept a couple things here and there, but then over time, I got into carpet pythons. I got into inverts, mostly tarantulas and scorpions, around 2007 ish. Might have been 06. I think 07 is probably more accurate. And was at a point with those where I honestly had mostly inverts and didn't have a ton of herps at the time. Kept stuff, random things here and there. Got into Bairds a little bit. Kept some Nicaraguan boas. Had a sort of an Amazon tree boa phase. Some more. I'm sure there was some Leonis and stuff in there. Some variable kings, cow kings here and there too. But it wasn't. I didn't really sort of like really dive headfirst into like the hobby and breeding as a sort of a solo thing, like outside of me and my dad doing it, until probably 2015 or 16. But as far as like the propagation stuff, it became so addicting so quickly. It was so cool to see the process of breeding corns and like my dad explaining like, we got to cool them down for this period of time, and then we're going to start pairing them up, and then we're going to get eggs, and then we're going to incubate them, and then you'll see babies. And seeing that whole process, at the age of 10 or 12, was really neat. And there's pictures of me too at that time. Like we're getting clutches of eggs, and I'm sitting there just watching that female lay them because we happened to walk in when she was in the process of laying and stuff. So I'm just sitting there staring at her, and it made me interested in other stuff too, and start sort of expanding as far as there's more out there than just corn snakes. And so started looking into getting more books and stuff, and saw pictures of carpet pythons and Amazon tree boas and things like that, and said one day, I want to get some of that stuff, and it would happen. It would just be a couple of years, but
Yeah.
it sort of just sparked the interest more, as like, okay, if this is cool, like surely there's other stuff that's just as cool out there too.
Yes. Yeah. And so, kind of early on, you brought up, going to snake shows with your dad. When were your first snake shows, and what were those experiences like?
Man, so as I remember it currently, shows back then seemed way better than shows we have currently, as far as like, I guess franchised shows is the would be the what we would consider them now. Um,
Okay.
Back then they were done by individuals, like independently. It was like kind of like how Bob Vu has his show now, where it was just a guy who was like, I want to do a reptile expo, and went through all the hoops and red tape and stuff of setting up the venues and things like that. It wasn't like something that was just such a regular occurrence like we get now, where it's scheduled out, a year in advance. It was kind of much more DIY back then. And I feel like, I mean, granted, my memory's kind of fuzzy as far as what I would see at those shows, but it just seemed like the variety was so much more existent. Because I think that was also really before balls boom, like the ball boom sort of came into play.
Yeah.
Um, but also that was before we got a lot of the restrictions and stuff that we have now, as far as ESA and things like that. Um, but I do, for whatever reason, I just remember the quality of the shows in comparison to what we go to now. Excluding like Daytona and Tinley and your bigger independent shows, is kind of, um, the quality just seemed better. But again, my memory's pretty fuzzy, so I could be
Yeah.
completely wrong. But
No, a different area completely, but kind of same time frame. I think that there's validity to that for sure. Where where I think now we've kind of reached this point where there's certain reptiles that are like the Budweisers of the
mm-hmm.
reptile world, where the soccer mom Sally that has no interest in reptiles can point at a picture and go, "Oh, that's a ball python, that's a
Yeah.
bearded dragon," and that money it's brought to the hobby and the awareness of the hobby. It makes sense why shows shifted over to that. It's what people were wanting. Early on, you talk to some of these guys, and colubrids were one of the original kind of snake craze
Yeah.
things. Here in the United States and throughout the world, but here's colubrids and all that cool stuff. But then, I mean, think about that time frame where those people they were just getting ball pythons in, and they
Mm-hmm.
hadn't figured out how to breed them yet. And same with leopard geckos. You hear stories of people getting a cattle trough of 100 leopard geckos
Mm-hmm.
and throwing them in there and just hoping they get eggs.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how to do it.
It's
And
very, very different times.
yes, yeah, and the excitement that people would feel to go, to make this, it makes sense. But that's what the market wanted, and that's where it went. And I think now, as you're getting more education in the hobby, you're seeing it branch back around
Mm-hmm.
to some of these more obscure species and North American colubrids in general. But I mean, that's just the way the hobby is. It's this ebb and flow throughout, no matter what it is.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of guys at those shows too that were much more like Chris Montross is kind of the one that comes to mind, of like they had their handful of things that they really 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 liked, and that was their thing. They didn't really deviate from that. They didn't have a bunch of random stuff. It was like, okay, if you were looking for house snakes, like there was a house snake guy that's like all he did. I feel
Yeah.
like that's still obviously around today. I just feel like back then it was more the norm than anything. But
Yeah. Well, I think this was to a shift in knowledge,
mm-hmm.
right? Where the people that had those animals and were propagating them and successfully keeping them and everything that entails, they had to work harder.
Mm-hmm.
than the average person. So it kind of created a natural barrier to entry where the people that did have it that were doing the unique thing, you kind of know that person really
Yeah.
worked to get there. Very interesting. And how do you think from that time frame? Because again, we're in kind of a similar where we were at, similar ages in the hobby, and kind of what was going on, different areas of the United States, but similar time frame. When did your knowledge gathering? What were early on? How were you getting information, and how did that shift over time?
Books to start. I still have most of the books I had as a kid, actually, and I remember there was one in particular. The names escape me at the moment, but I took that thing to school. I think every day for what felt like forever, um, to the point to where like pages were falling out of it, kind of thing. And then again, early 2000s into the sort of the mid 2000s, came across Reptiles magazine and subscribed to that for probably 10 years. Um, and then in sort of in that mix, kingsnake.com was a big one. Anthony Campanetto's site on with carpet pythons, he had a lot of articles and stuff on carpets in there that I printed and read front to back. I don't know how many times. Is it Mike Heinrich maybe that did Amazons around then? It's the Amazon Alliance, I think was the name of the thing. He had a website too, and again with Amazons, man, I was like sucking up as much information as I could. But yeah, it started with books and then the magazines, but then sort of as the internet became more commonplace, King Snake was a big one. Some of the forums were also good sources that I would find myself on and reading stuff, and um, got really big into became that sort of my obsession with bush vipers came around that time too. I came across I think it was worldofathorist.com was Michael Jacoby's website. That just had, it was basically just a website that had all the species of Atheris with pictures and information and stuff. Um, I was on that a lot, and then also the Southeastern Hot Herp Society when that was a thing. Uh, I was reading articles and bite reports on that website all the time, and that was another one where I printed some out. But um, there's a sort of a core handful of websites for sure that I spent some time on, and um, I used to like early in, I don't know, maybe fifth or sixth grade. I used to, my mom still kind of laughs at this, but I used to write down scientific names on index cards, and I just had a giant like gallon Ziploc bag full of them. And usually instead of studying and paying attention in class like I was supposed to, I'd just be flipping through those, like testing myself. And um, she was just talking about it the other night actually, because we went over there for dinner, and she always just kind of not bullies me, but just kind of laughs about my bag of flashcards. And
Yeah. Hey man, that's super cool though. I just spoke to someone else that they said that that's what their family would do.
mm-hmm.
They would do flashcards of scientific names, and then they would all try to learn scientific names. And on road trips, whoever could stump the family on a scientific name won. And I remember hearing that thinking, what a, oh man, I wish my parents would have done that with me. That's so cool. you know. So, but I think it speaks to the character of yourself and you know, you doing it and doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
How smart. What were your peers thinking about at this time? Do you have any people that were into the hobby too when you were younger like
Oh,
that?
I was picked on relentlessly.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, so looking back on it now, like, can I really blame them? It was a pretty low hanging fruit. Like, I kind of understand. Yeah, middle school was brutal, dude. Like, it being a military kid, I firmly believe that. And if anyone else has been a military kid and moved around a lot, like you understand, like I think you get a certain level of independence where you don't need consistent and regular friend groups, as sort of dark and sad as that sounds. I don't know. I just didn't really have. I had friends wherever we lived, but it was literally like maybe two or three that I would hang out with on a regular basis. Like I was not. devastated when we'd move and have to find new friends and stuff. Like I got pretty self-sufficient. So a lot of the kids that would mess with me, dude, like that was the only thing they had on me was the snake thing. And so that would be like, the names and bullying would always, because that's all they had, that's what they would throw at me. And it was like, okay. And if anything, thinking about it now, like maybe that's what made me cling to it even more, because it was like, that's all they got. Like, this is my thing then, it's, they literally have no other information on me. Like, they don't know anything else about me. They just know that I'm the kid with the flashcards and whatever.
I think it's so cool too, the idea of just if you commit to being a dork long enough, it ends up being really cool, and there's people around you that think it's cool. And I think that's a valuable lesson that you don't know when you're younger, and as you get older you learn that. But if you think, man, if I could tell young me this, like, hey, just keep doing what you're doing, because one day it's going to be cool. You run into that.
And having a daughter now that's also in middle school, and knowing, like, seeing the stuff that she deals with and thinking about like what it was like when I dealt with that stuff is kind of interesting too. Like, when you become a parent, you kind of come full circle. Some of the day-to-day problems that she has and stuff, I'm like, I remember stuff like that. And like, now you looking back, you're like, it was so inconsequential and dumb. But at the time it was a very big deal. It was devastating. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, like I said, I got messed with a lot. Maybe the only reason I didn't get like physically bullied more was because I was larger than most children. I don't know, but I think it made me bond and cling to it a little more.
Yeah. Was there a point where who were your mentors around that same time frame? Was there anybody, obviously your father, but were there any outside influences that were people that you felt kind of took you under their wing?
Not like directly or regularly. So there was a guy in Charleston, and I'm sure if anyone's been around long enough, they'll remember the name Alan Bosch, of Alan Bosch Reptiles. He was based out of Charleston for years, and he had a booth in this flea market in Ladson that I also spent a lot of time at as a kid. And so every time we'd go to that, I'd beeline for his booth and probably be that annoying kid that was just loitering more or less, and didn't have any money to actually buy anything, but had questions and just looked at stuff endlessly. I got my first Pituovas from him. I think he's since retired, and I think he lives out west somewhere now, but he was kind of a big one in like a weird way. Like I said, I wasn't like hanging out with him or anything. It was just one of those things where we'd go to the flea market, on certain weekends, and he'd be there. And I think he vaguely remembered me. He sold me my first snake hook, which I still have that hook somewhere. But there was him, and then Tony Mills, who I actually met probably somewhere in that like 2005-ish range. He was doing they had some booth set up downtown at some event at the time he was working for Savannah River Ecology Labs as a herpetologist, and he had some baby gators and stuff. And I remember sort of talking to him briefly. Oddly enough, like 2 or 3 years after that, my first job would be working for him at the Low Country Institute, which is on Spring Island in South Carolina here. So he was a big one. That was sort of a little later. I was 16 or 17, 16, I think, when I started working there. That was my very first job. Maybe I was 15. I don't know. It's all a blur, dude. It's
It's all good.
But yeah, I mean, really, I didn't really have any like direct people, besides, I guess my dad would be the big one. But I was an Irwin kid too. I had Steve Irwin action figures. I watched Jeff Corwin every chance I got. O'Shea. Like, looking back now and seeing like just the production value and stuff in O'Shea's work, and like, I guess it's because now we have the context of like the sensationalized over the top stuff that we get now on the internet, that looking back on that stuff, I have so much more respect and appreciation for O'Shea and Corwin and stuff as a result. But yeah, it was those guys. Austin Stevens was one. He kind of came in later in the game, and Don Schultz before he had his sort of monitor illegal capture thing happen when he had his little stint on Animal Planet. And yeah, there's just, it's the usual suspects as far as that goes. But
Yeah. I wonder if this is something that you experienced too. And this is my how I experienced it, where I'll start off, of course, we're watching Steve Irwin, we were like, holy crap, this is the coolest thing ever. And then as you start to get around more professionals and people that are older in the hobby, and they go, man, it's all staged. And like, do you really think that's the way you should be handling these animals? And all that stuff that you start to go, oh, okay, maybe
yeah,
this guy isn't as great. And maybe it's actually harmful. Now, I don't agree with that, but did you have that shift in your younger mind where it went from, oh, badass to, maybe this isn't good?
yes. Going back and watching that stuff now,
It's crazy.
if I'm being completely honest and frank, it's kind of incredible that he lived as long as he did.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's an objective opinion. I feel like that's like anybody would look at that and say, yeah, probably. Like that's actually impressive. It's I look at it now and it kind of just it makes me cringe. Like I have full appreciation for him as a person and what he did and like the passion involved, and like the man reached people without a doubt. But I watch the stuff now mostly with like venomous snakes, like the crocodiles and stuff. Like I think that's just a normal like Monday morning in Australia for most of them. But with like you look back at like the mambas and the cobras and the other rattlesnakes that he would sort of more or less free handle.
Yeah.
I just look back on it now and I'm like, Jesus, like this how like I how did I like this as much as I did? And I think that's why I gravitated more towards like O'Shea and Corwin. Corwin more so, I think. If I had to choose between him and Irwin, I was more of a Corwin guy. And I think it's because it was much more toned down. Corwin just always seemed so much more like relaxed with stuff. It wasn't like
Yeah.
the danger thing. And it's like I get it. Like that's that around that time, like that's what had to happen to get people's attention, and now it's even more so. It's cranked up even more now. But I don't know, man. I appreciate what he did, and I think he did a phenomenal job at reaching people and getting the message across. And I think he did a lot for the hobby, like getting people like kids like myself interested in that kind of stuff.
100%.
But looking back on it now, I'm like, good Lord, just this is the sound effects and the looking back on it now too, like yeah, staging was like it's kind of obvious now when you watch it as you're older, but as a kid you were like, oh my god, he just found a giant Egyptian cobra just hanging out in a tree, like
Yes.
wow.
Yeah. And I think that, it's important to say it's not to devalue what that was,
Yeah, not at all.
because it's the same that I look at ball pythons, that I look at that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That show opened up the potential for the Jeff Corwins, for the Mark O'Sheas to get to be on TV and do that. That if it wasn't for the numbers that guy was pushing, we can disagree, and I do, with what you saw and looking back on it, what was happening. But and then too, the value that guy has saved more reptiles than I ever will
Yeah,
in my life, no matter how much work I put in, because it gave the average person that never gave a flying crap about these animals something they thought about Steve Irwin when they
yeah, it
saw the
made him at least take
rattlesnake.
pause and think about
Yes.
it. Yeah,
And
for sure.
how many animals were able to go whoop, into that hole and get out of there when
No.
that split moment. But just very interesting,
Yeah, and
to
like I said,
think
I
about.
fully appreciate what he did. It's just like uh it didn't have to be so extreme.
Yes. Well, it did. I mean, they had to get the views, right? And unfortunately, that's what sells. It still happens today. We see that where, how many well-intended people come up to you when you're talking about reptiles, and you get kind of a few reactions. If it's not, well, I killed that thing, then another one that I feel like you get often is, oh yeah, I saw this guy that looks like blah 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 on the internet doing blah 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 blah, and you're going, yeah, we don't
Yeah,
condone that. That's
they're
not
they're
good.
not with us.
Yes, but unfortunately, that's what brings it in. And so
Yeah.
when we run into those people that are those people, hopefully they find something like the podcast you're putting out, the
Hmm.
information that's there, that they get to see a different side of this, that is a responsible keeper that's thinking about this. And I don't know. I think
Yeah, I
that
have coworkers, man, that like on a regular basis they'll show me like stuff that's on their TikTok, and it's like the usual suspects of social media, like free handling stuff like idiots, and they're like, "Did you see this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know that dude. I don't like know him, but I know the circle and like know people that know him." And I'm like, "They're idiots.
yeah,
Like that's not how it's done. It's really not that exciting. Like keeping venomous is not that sexy. Like they're really hamming it up for the camera. Like it's really not like that."
yeah,
But unfortunately, that's what the general public gets to see, and that's their window to our world. Unfortunately, and
yeah.
yeah,
I think but it's just how, when you get the opportunity that you're the opposite of that, the inverse of that, take the time, educate those
yeah,
people. They're interested and they might have never been in their lives. And so do your part, give them the information, because you never know,
yeah,
to the obviously in the snake line, Budweiser drinking
mm-hmm.
guy that brought the berm to school.
Yep.
You never know what those little influences, what that's going to echo out into the world over time.
Mm-hmm. But I also try to like give people a little more, not necessarily the people putting out the content, but the people taking it in. Like I'm not my brain doesn't work the same way it did when I saw that berm as a little kid. At the time it was awesome. Like looking back on it now with more context and stuff in life and like berms in particular, and like it your views on things change over time, and I completely lost my train of thought. There's a damn jet flying over the house. I live near an air base, and I think they're all training and getting ready to head overseas to a certain very hot location. They've been busy, so I don't know
So
if you can
funny.
hear it or not.
I did hear it, which is,
Okay.
I live not far from a military base, but they don't fly at night for the most part. But I think it's also kind of, it's interesting to think about what's going on in the world and kind of documenting it at this point,
Yeah.
and then in the future us will know the outcome of all of this.
Yeah.
It's interesting, interesting. It's the whole thing we're talking about. Well, that's so cool. And so you were talking about your first job being something that was reptile related. What was that? And tell me more about that.
So that was just like an animal caretaker job. There's a place called the Low Country Institute, and they have a nature center on Spring Island with native species of herps that we have here in South Carolina. Um, they like were heads of master naturalist programs locally and stuff like that. And I got that job because one of the teachers I had in high school started dating Tony, and they're married now. They have been for a long time now, since then. So we're talking like 2007, 2008. Um, got that job. It was part time. It wasn't full time at all. It was like 3 days, 2 days a week or something like that. Spent the bulk of it by myself. Like people would come in, I'd talk to them. Visitors to Spring Island and stuff um, would come in, and I'd talk to them about the stuff that they were looking at. They'd have questions. I'd answer them. I was taking care of everything, minus the venomous at the time because it was a pretty big liability on the institute's part. Um, but we had baby gators and I think almost, not really almost, but a lot of the native species of snake to South Carolina, some marbled salamanders, some other odds and ends, snapping turtles, amphiumas. Like there were some fish too that I was taking care of. Um, it was really cool for a first job. It was awesome, and I was there. I was there for it was probably about a year, and then they had some funding issues. So unfortunately, I got laid off, which was devastating, and I had to get a regular job. Um, but it was a blast, man. It was exactly what I would have wanted from a first job. It was basically getting to do the same thing I do at home, like except I get to play with baby alligators whenever I want, and there's nothing going on. It's slow, just it was a blast, dude. We had both species of hognose, coach whip, massive pine snake, a couple corns, copperheads, cottonmouth, canebrake, coral snake, scarlet kings. I think there were some rough greens in the mix somewhere. A lot, like a lot
Yeah.
of the species that we have here, minus your much more specialized feeder stuff, like your scarlet snakes and things like that. So
Yeah.
it was
How cool.
it was cool.
Very cool. Very cool. And then so after that, went doing the regular job,
Yep,
grind, and
worked at Walgreens
oh wow,
for the
what a
following
fun
7 years.
shift.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Well, I'm sure that was fun.
That was, as much like that was a great job though. Like I learned so much about myself and people, and like I won't say a bad thing about that job. It was like it had its moments for sure, but like every job I've worked, but that one in particular, I learned so much because I literally started there like as a kid, and by the time I left, I was like mid management and had been there for damn near a decade. Like I learned a lot. I
Yes.
it's
Well,
great.
no, and there's validity to that 100%, where when you start to think about uh, learning how to manage people and customer service and just all of those things that go into something like that, um, there's definitely value to be learned from that.
Yeah, yeah.
I
It
think
was.
that's my
I won't badmouth that job. Like I said, probably wouldn't be where I am today or who I am today if it weren't for that job and my formative years being there. Um,
yeah, yeah.
it's wild.
Interesting. Very cool. Very cool. And so, were you keeping reptiles that whole time? I think that early on, it seems like that was the case.
Yeah, yeah. Most of it. There was one like a year long period somewhere in there. I think towards the end of my time when I was working at Walgreens that I did take a break for about a year. I think I just had a day gecko and a ornamental tarantula that I had since she was teeny tiny on my like could fit on my fingernail. Um, but then sort of after that break, got kind of the itch again and sort of started getting back into stuff and that kind of thing. And that break was good. I was really focused on playing music and stuff at that point too because I started playing drums in high school. So that was sort of the other half of life was like music and legitimately wanting to pursue that, and I'm kind of glad I didn't. But
Yeah.
that took up a lot of time and focus, and so after a while, I was kind of like, I just need to. I'm not doing right by the animals. I wasn't at home as much as I should have been, and just took a break from it, and then came back even more ready to go.
Yeah. I think that's an important part where you. I think again another thing I can relate with, where some form where you kind of step away from the hobby, and then you get to come back into the hobby, where I think we all kind of go through a phase where we have the Noah's Ark syndrome, where you have a little bit of this and a little bit of
Yeah.
that, and I think that when you get to a point where burnout or whatever that is for you, or life becoming important and bills to pay, that you get out of the hobby, and then when it's time to come back into it,
Mm-hmm.
it's a more mature fire that you have now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it was very much more so laser focused. something that you had brought up that is not something that, as a reptile keeper, I've dabbled in, inverts and different animals throughout time as that goes with the overlap, but something that I'm relatively ignorant about. Um, what are there any historical kind of tarantula keeping people or things that you think maybe don't get discussed that should be, that are interesting, or anything? Again, I'm ignorant to the situation or the hobby.
Um, there was one forum in particular, and it's still around. It's just like every other forum on the planet. It's just not as active as it used to be, and that was Arachno Boards was one that I was on pretty regularly, reading stuff, that kind of thing, and that was also sort of before some of the stuff that we have currently got ESA listed. So that was back when you could buy like the Sri Lankan ornamental species without any issues. Like you could ship them, you could buy them, you could trade them, you could, sell them, all that stuff. Now I came back into inverts within the last 2 years because it was the Daytona before last that I saw an ornamental, like a Metallica, one of the Goodies, the blue ones.
Mm.
And I was like, man, I kind of miss keeping tarantulas, and bought one there at that Daytona, and then bought a Regalis like that same day. And that sort of reignited the passion for those again. And so coming back into the invert hobby after a long time off, many years, and realizing like, well, now you can't get a lot of the stuff that I used to keep because it's ESA listed. So you have to like know somebody that's willing to send you some as a gift. So if anything, I have a better appreciation for the stuff that we can get still. But then also realizing like taxonomy is just an absolute nightmare. Like you think it's bad in some reptiles, like mother of God, taxonomy and inverts, especially tarantulas and stuff, is mostly a mess. But there wasn't, as far as like people go, wasn't really anyone in particular. Kelly Swift of Swift Inverts, I bought some tarantulas from him when I was a kid off the internet, which thinking back now, I'm kind of like, how was I able to buy, whose card did I have to buy stuff off the internet? Because I honestly don't remember. That was like before I had a job. I think. I don't know. It's all a blur, but he was one that I bought from pretty regularly, and no one else really sort of comes to mind when I think about it, except for some YouTube guys that aren't really active anymore. And yeah, it's so weird, man. I equate it to like getting back into it, to sort of like running into your high school girlfriend again and realizing like just how great it was. I'm sure some people had the opposite experience with their high school girlfriends, but it's weird. Like I almost feel like I'm cheating on the herp side of stuff, because it's like I'm enjoying it so much that I'm just like, I'm gonna leave everything. I'm just gonna switch to inverts entirely. I was like, this is awesome. Like what have I been doing this entire time? But I have so many species though that I'm keeping and stuff that I could never not have, because I know as soon as I got rid of them, I'd regret it immediately. And so it's just kind of balancing and cutting back on some herp stuff that I'm just not as fired up about as I used to be, or for
Yeah.
economical purposes. Feeding a bunch of spiders is way cheaper than feeding a bunch of snakes.
Yeah.
So it's
For sure, for sure. Well, how cool is that? Very cool, and to follow his passions, and so if we're not jumping too far ahead, and if there's anything I'm missing here, throw it out. But what what gave you the idea to start your podcast, and what that turned into? Why did you do that?
I don't know. Joe Phelan's From the Ground Up podcast had kind of been around for a little while around that time, and I was, I watched some episodes and he had some guests on. I'm like, man, he should have been asking like about this and this and this, and because I wouldn't always catch him live, so it'd be after the fact. And at around that time, I met Jake Jacob Bratz, who I do started THP with, the Herpetoculture podcast. Somehow, like the stars must have aligned or something, because it's got to be some sort of weird divine intervention or something, because we had no idea that we lived in the same town. Like, Buford is not a big town. And I think he messaged me on Instagram one day and was, we started talking. He's like, "Are you in Buford?" I was like, "Yeah." "Are you?" He's like, "Yeah." And so then at the time he was living, he'll tell you the same thing too, dude. But at the time I first met him and like went over to his place to see his snakes and stuff, he was living in this like super shady trailer that was like falling apart. I remember rolling up to that place and like looking at it from inside my car, like, I'm 100% about to get fucking robbed. Like, there's no way I'm not. I was like, this is rough. This looks bad. I told him I was here, and then he poked his head out the door, and he was like, "Oh yeah, come on in." And then, he had a king rat at the time, some blood pythons. He had some carpets, and so we started just hanging out regularly after that. And after a couple weeks, I had kind of been toying around with the idea of starting a podcast, and I was like, well, who would I do it with? And it was like, at this point, Jake and I have so many conversations about herps. Like, why aren't we just recording that? Because that's pretty much what it would be. So I presented to him and said, "Hey, I want to start a podcast, and do you want to do it with me?" And his first thing was like, "What would we talk about?" And it was the same thing of like, it's just recording the conversations that we already have. Like when we're sitting around smoking cigars or whatever. He was like, "Oh, okay." I think he was a little trepidatious at first, and I don't think he really understood like the whole what I was thinking, what I had in mind for it. But started that, and that was 2017, maybe 2018. But we've been, eventually it morphed into the network. Because around the same time of starting THP, I kind of started getting into chondros a little bit. As a result, started ChondroCast, which was chondro specific. Did that for a little while. Then we started Snakes and Stogies with Phil Wolf, Corn Stars with Chris Painchab. Now we have Arachnerds, and Jake has Flippin' Tin with Gabe Schuler and Sky Williams. And eventually I just realized, like, why don't we just, instead of trying to have separate feeds for each show, because at the time it was mostly ChondroCast and THP, and then Snakes and Stogies kind of came into the mix. And I was like, it doesn't make sense to pay for 3 subscriptions to upload 3 different shows. So I was like, why don't I just put them all in the same stream, and we'll just say that it's the network, which is, how that sort of happened. And then at first I wasn't sure really how well it would work with everything sort of being in the same, feed. If people would like miss stuff because other stuff came in after the fact and got bumped, or how it would work. But it worked out pretty well, and that's just how we've rolled so far. Then it's cool. We've definitely slowed down the last like year or so. Things have slowed down a little bit. I have noticed over time, like with the podcast, like anything else, you kind of have just times where things just aren't as, you're not feeling it as much. Call it burnout, call it whatever you want, but we definitely have been kind of in one of those points, the last year or so, where things have just kind of been, we're still putting out shows and stuff. I just don't think we're not as fired up to really put more effort into it than we are. But
yeah,
I think we're coming up on 10 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So I have to look. It's crazy to think that we're there.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's just like anything in life, that the commitment of time to put into it, the fact that our lives are finite, is the admirable aspect to it. And and that is a long amount of time, and whether it's an hour or 2 hours, and then all the work that goes into it. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to type up a summary for the post to put up,
Mhm.
where it's like, oh my god, how do I, I want to put as much effort as I did this into the last guest. That can be kind of daunting sometimes,
It can be.
and to think about doing that for 10 years. I hope that in 10 years I can go, oh, I still did this.
Yeah.
That's, I mean,
Yeah.
it's very admirable.
See, and I don't know. Like when I started THP, I told Jake, I was like, look, no one's gonna listen to this. Like, first of all, like we're not gonna. It's not gonna. If it takes off, it's gonna be 2 years at a minimum before it like gets any sort of traction. Um, so like the stats and the analytics and stuff were never something I really obsessed over, and it was always kind of one of those things where it's like we're just doing it because we enjoy it. Like we want to talk about herps. Like that's what the whole point of it was. Is like maybe there's people out there that agree. Maybe there's people out there that'll enjoy it. But like sort of I think going into it and the reason that we've had the longevity and stuff we have, I maybe say success. I don't know what the measure of success is for a podcast anymore, but it was like I don't go in it with any preconceived notions of like, okay, by the 6th month we need to be at 1,000 downloads or 1,000 plays, and it was like whatever happens happens. I told Jake, I was like, dude, we're just like I'm letting go of the wheel, like it just see where it takes us, see what happens, and to think now like we wouldn't know 75 plus percent of the people we know now that we can actually call like really good friends. Like I've got people that I talk to more that I only see at Daytona once a year than I have like not immediate family, but family that lives here that I almost rarely see or never talk to.
Yep.
It's crazy to think like the stuff that's sort of sprouted as a result of just doing the podcast and like letting it go where it goes. Because eventually it morphed into the magazine and like expanding into the network and fulvius stuff and the species that I'm keeping now and like the people that have helped me get those species and stuff like so much of what I have right now, like who I am and what I've done would not have happened if it weren't for starting that podcast with Jake.
It's just interesting how that just the little decisions we make lead us
Right.
to where we're at. And something that would be amiss not to speak about is your fulvius apparel. And I mean, some of the coolest, but the absolute coolest reptile related apparel that you can wear, right? I mean, I think the way that you're doing it, it is mature in a way where an adult can wear it, and the reptile dork will appreciate
Mm-hmm.
the joke. Your Splendida shirt. What a awesome, great idea! I love
was
it.
was waiting on a
All the
cease
design.
and desist on that one at some point. It hasn't shown up yet though. So
The just the designs are classy and cool in a way where so often it's this kitschy kind of goofy stuff that you're
yeah.
not going to wear as an adult, but just such a cool clothing brand, and concept that you're doing there. Where did that come from, and what gave you the ideas to do that?
So I there's a habit of finding whatever I'm doing for work at the time, finding a way to tie it into herps. So like when we were doing Herpetoculture magazine, I was working for magazines locally. Um, and that's where I learned like the whole business and how like the business model of it and how it works and how to do it. Um, had taught myself Adobe InDesign to do the magazine, which gave me like a fairly base level knowledge of Photoshop. Um, fast forward, I left that job, worked in cigars for a handful of years, and I still I'll work there sometimes part time, but eventually landed at the job I'm at now, which is running an apparel printer, so a t-shirt shop more or less. And I don't know, there wasn't really anything in particular that made me go like, I need to start an apparel brand. I just was like, I had an idea for a shirt, and I was like, well, I should put something together and see what I can do with that. And I think there was some podcast shirt stuff that people were wanting too. So I was like, well, now I have the avenue to be able to do that. But it started with like one or two designs that I was like, okay, I was like, this is something I would wear. It was realizing too that a lot of species and genre, it's almost like sports teams. Like people have their team, and like they want to show it, like they want to represent it, they want to wear it. And so it just, after doing a handful of designs, mostly for myself, I kind of thought about it more, and I was like, I should really, like, there's no one else really doing anything in apparel wise as far as herps go, at least like kind of what I was into, because that's sort of where I was at with shirts as well, is like there's this like tap out affliction stuff that I can't relate to in any way whatsoever. Like I don't have bedazzled jeans and
I was gonna say
like,
studded pants would look nice on you, Papa.
exactly. But like then there was sort of like the stuff that the beardy moms wear, where it was like, I like my bearded dragon and like three people. And I was like, I don't want that. I want something that's like that normal people won't really get, but like if you're in it,
Yeah.
And so wanting to sort of get something to people that has that, that is sort of more science centric, I guess would be the way to say it. But at the same time, also like having a really stupid sense of humor and wanting to put out herp shirts that are probably not going to be appreciated by a lot of people because they don't like puns. And so over time, it's just been like I'm in a position where I can print these shirts and not have to sit on a ton of inventory and stuff like most apparel brands and businesses would have to, because it's a very tough business to really break out into, as far as like getting traction and customers, and it not necessarily a lifestyle brand, but there's a lot of people making shirts, right? But also, again, sort of looking around and realizing like there's really nothing for people like me in the herp realm that are like not casual hobbyists, not doing it professionally, but like serious about it, so it sort of just snowballed from there. And then I eventually like made a website and started doing designs on a regular basis, and I've vended Daytona once, haven't really vended any other shows since, but I gave it about a year or so to kind of really test it and see how it did without putting any real marketing dollars or advertising dollars behind it. And it really sort of took off. And I'm sure like the podcasts and the network and stuff had a hand in it, because we already had a listener base that I could be like, hey, here's some shirts. But it just over time, I was like, I got tired of not having any cool herp shirts again that like I could feel comfortable wearing out in public and not feeling like a complete doofus.
Yeah.
And it's just been one of those things where I've learned more with Photoshop. Like I really struggle with the idea of calling myself like an artist. But I think I do kind of have a certain, not necessarily formula, but like a style of how I've gone about making some of the designs and stuff, that I've gotten a lot of compliments on, and people seem to acknowledge it as a style, I guess, if you would. But it's just been really cool, man. There's so many new names, because I see, I get orders, so I see the names of all the people that are ordering stuff, and like I see so many new names and stuff on a regular basis that it really blows my mind that there's even enough people that care enough to even want to buy this stuff. It's really surprising, that it's done as well as it has, and it's not a full-time gig by any means, but just the fact that there's a steady stream of people that are willing to give up their hard-earned dollars for it is
Oh yeah.
Mind blowing.
Well, it's cool and good quality stuff, and I think it's cool. And one thing that I think is so interesting about this hobby, and I've had, I've been lucky enough to, even in the short time I've been doing this, get to talk to this large sample size of the community. I think that reptile hobbyists are unique in the fact that it becomes something that is all, if you're really hardcore about it, it becomes all encompassing of who we are. And so, no matter, you talking about any job you've done relates back to what you're doing, your interest in the hobby. That's something I can relate with. Where being in the medical field, I saw things where I went, "Huh, what about this? What about
Yeah.
that?" And that was just right. That's what I had to do to pay my bills, and I found that interest and that passion, and I applied it to the thing that I'm doing. And I think that that is unique with the reptile hobby,
Yeah.
where again, very anecdotally and just kind of just kind of broad spectrum applying this to people. But you know that some hobbies, right, people are just interested in this minute focus in it, but with reptiles it ends up being this very broad thing where, yeah, what you're doing is art, and
Fiber of
and
being kind of thing, you know?
yes, and so everything that you're doing applies back to reptiles. So if it's, you're working in the lab and you see a thermometer in the water, well, why is that? That then applies to, you know,
How can I use that at
brumating your
home?
animals,
Yeah.
or why are my
How can I
animals
apply
doing
it?
this, or
Mhm.
clothing, or everything else. And it's so cool to get to talk to people like yourself and these other people, and to hear how that culminated within their
Mhm.
life. I think is remarkably cool, and it's fun to get this little sample size of people, and it applies to so many of the hardcore keepers in the hobby. Very cool.
Yeah, and I mean, like when I was working for the magazines and stuff, like I liked that job. I didn't have an issue with that job. Like it did have its stressful moments, but it was like, man, I know how to do this now. Like we can put out a magazine on our own and make it free. And like we did that for I think 2 or 3 years, and like it was just same thing with Fulvius now is like I love my job. Like for the first time I think in my adult life I can firmly say that I truly love and enjoy my job and going there on a daily basis. But it was one of those things of like, how can I love it more?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
how can I tie it into the other thing outside of work that is like all that I do, like fiber of being again, like I was saying, like it is at a DNA level of attachment. Um, how can I take this and bring it to the hobby and do something interesting there? Like it was never same with the magazine and Fulvius. It was never like there's a huge gap here that needs to be filled and I can make a ton of money. It was like no, like Reptiles magazine was cool and all. It was really good, I think, in the early 2000s, and then it was kind of like I felt like it got kind of repetitive, and I was like, we know enough people at this point to where we could probably crank out some issues on a regular basis, and um, basically wanting to sort of bring back a magazine that was reminiscent of Reptiles in in the early days. And um, again, we did that for a couple of years, and then it kind of just sort of dissolved. And but it was again just wanting to build the hobby and like make it better than it was the day previously, and trying to do it for the benefit of everyone and making it better. Um, and with Fulvius, I guess it's not so much that, it's mostly just because it's fun and I enjoy it. But like, I've had so many people ask me, like, if I wear that hemipene shirt, like, what is that? And it's kind of funny because it's like, well, it's this. You won't really get the joke, but this is,
Yes.
and it's like, hey, people learned something that day, like conversation
Yeah.
piece at the very least.
Well, I think that, I get the hesitation to call yourself an artist, and but it is the reality of what it is. And I think that reptiles, if you look at it in this way that's so interesting, that it really is art, whether it's the breeding of snakes or the going out in the field and capturing the essence of that animal in a photo,
Yeah.
or it's figuring out where to be and when at the right time, or going on and doing a podcast, or going on and doing making a clothing brand. It is art, and reptiles are this really interesting palette of color that we get to
Hmm.
work within because it's what we're passionate about. And I just think it's very cool, and how
Yeah.
people do their art. I really enjoy, and I don't think it's not appropriate to call it art. I think it's very much so appropriate. Well, that's so interesting. And being respectful of your time, and we try to start to wind down here. Is there anything I've missed, that maybe something that you think I should have asked you about that I didn't?
Um, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, it could be like fun to. I mean, and maybe not, right? And then, is there anything that where do you see the hobby from when you started, and where do you see it going now into the future?
Oh man,
It's a broad question, but
it is. But I think about it now, especially when I was getting into green trees and bred those, and like just how easy we have it now compared to back in the days of Trooper Walsh and them trying to figure it out with no information to go by on how to breed stuff like that. Like we have it so good right now, especially recently with like the AI stuff and all that. Like it's I feel like it's never been easier to keep stuff alive. Breeding, maybe that's a little trickier because there is a little more nuance there, but like it's just wild now. Like, yeah, we're the regulations over time and legalities of things changing and putting a damper on some stuff sucks, but just with the sheer array of what we can get our hands on now, to be able to keep stuff that 20 years ago no one had. Like rhino rats are a great example of that. Like I remember seeing those in Reptiles magazine and the Pro Exotics ad and being like, those are cool. Like I'll probably never own one because Pro Exotics and Rob Stone were like the only people that had them at the time, right? And now it's like I have a room full of them, and it's like I can make more of them. And same with green trees. I remember seeing the Signal Herp ads and seeing like, man, like those are so cool. Like I'll as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, whatever, saying like I don't think I'll ever be able to get those. But now it's like I have some, and it's so cool to see species that I thought would never happen as a kid, and being able to have them now, and know other people that are keeping them and breeding them too and doing really cool stuff. And then where it's going. I'm kind of I'm kind of torn. Like the whole AI thing. I'm not really scared of AI necessarily, but I think if you look at, depending on how you look at it, right? So I think it can be a great tool that we can apply to the hobby via just new technologies and things. I think we were talking about it on a podcast recently. I don't remember if it was Snakes and Stogies or what, but like think of having something that can pull data. Like again, I'll use green trees as an example, or emerald tree boas. Haven't kept those, haven't bred them, but um, say we had something that could track weather throughout the year, but then be able to tell you, okay, this is like this week or this month, like you need to start feeding a little heavier, so that when you go to pair them on this date, you're it sort of not necessarily automation, but like there's an ability for it to be able to sort of track not only the individual animals and like year over year how they're cycling and stuff like that, but also be able to pull information that's going on in their natural range and saying like, just so you know, it's going to be raining here for the next 2 weeks straight. Like this is what your temperatures and stuff are going to be looking like. Being able to maybe forecast, I guess is probably the best word for it. But like, I think of stuff like that, and I think eventually we will see it, and I think it's really cool that we'll be living in a time where we'll get to have that. I see we've already seen sort of a shift as far as what people are keeping and getting into. Ball pythons are never going to go away. I don't have anything against them, but it is nice to see people sort of diversifying and branching out a little more and seeing people keeping more obscure stuff. And I see that trend continuing, especially as social media and internet and information gets out there more and more. People are getting exposed to species that maybe they wouldn't have seen otherwise. Overall, I think it's good. Obviously, in the wrong hands with the wrong people, it can be terrible, but just depends on how you want to look at it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I agree. Well, excellent. Well, I think that we'll call it for tonight, but I'm sure when I'm editing this, I'll think of a million things that I should have said and follow-up questions that I didn't ask. And I hope we get to do this again in the future.
Absolutely.
And thank you. You were the first person to have me on as a guest on your podcast. And
you need to follow up for it because it's been like 2 years?
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.